Okay, hey, my name's Robert Ristroph. I'm a technical architect with PS, and this talk is like a brief sort of introduction overview of Cloudflare workers, and it was put together a little bit last minute because another talk got canceled. And so the goals of this talk are really that you know what they are, you have an idea of how difficult it is to set them up, so you know whether you should be intimidated by them or not, and you shouldn't. But and you sort of know where they might have a place in like what you want to do. Have my contact info up here, my Twitter, my email. Let's go. So here's kind of what I was going to run through. I want to tell you what they are, and then I want to show you what they are, which is the part that will actually matter, and show some actual example code, and then talk a little bit about sort of how to manage, or a little bit about where this belongs in your infrastructure and stuff like that, and wind up with some options, because not everybody uses Cloudflare and maybe not everybody should, and the basic idea of what they do can be achieved with other products as well. But I didn't have time to make a generic talk about like smart CDNs or something. Like I just had examples from Cloudflare. So with that, what a Cloudflare worker is. So first I should say what a CDN is, right? So it's generally servers that are not yours, that are off on the internet somewhere, but your domain points to them first. So the requests come to there first. And most of the time, if it's not a logged in person, they have a copy of the page and return it to you, and you never get the traffic. It stands for Content Delivery Network. And what Cloudflare workers are is they're part of a general trend to have more smarts there, so that you can have bits of code that do special things, like based on the language of the browser or time of day or anything, so that you can do small bits of calculation there, not a lot. And the analogy there is to custom VCL files on a system that has Varnish. Although usually when you're using Varnish with Drupal, it's a cache that's on your computer. It's not like spread out there on the internet protecting you from the traffic. You're still handling it. There is a CDN Fastly which uses Varnish that would apply in that case. I think, let me just, so Cloudflare has a free plan that a lot of people, with blogs and stuff like that use. If you, there was a time when most of the people I knew had websites, hosted them off a server in their closet, off a cable modem connection. And then that became impossible for a while. And Cloudflare has a free plan that actually makes that possible again. So if you do just run your own server, even if it's to screw around, see what the latest of this or that Drupal distro looks like, with my blog content. If you put Cloudflare in front of it, you probably won't wake up in the morning and find your cable modem was shut down for abuse. I mean, if you also do other things like not run an open mail relay and stuff like that. But so it's pretty useful, and you get some amount of ability to run workers with that free account, which means that you as a developer can play around with this and learn how to use it pretty easily. Everything I'm going to show you is written in JavaScript, which, as far as I can tell, is pretty much what almost everybody I've ever seen uses to write these workers in. Although technically, I think you can write them in C and a couple of other things, and upload them that way. Let me just look ahead and see what my next slide is. Okay. So I think one of the best ways to describe this, because everything I've said is kind of just words, I think showing is always better than talking. And so right here what I did is I went to cloudflareworkers.com, and it redirected, and it gave me this URL that's on the screen with like the hash on it. And actually, you know what? I'm going to start from scratch. I'm going to just reload this. So I'm going to cloudflareworkers.com as if I was coming in fresh. And what this is a development environment for Cloudflare Workers, so you can test it. What you see on the left here is the example worker. And you see JavaScript there, and the key thing is there's a handle request function, and that code is going to run on the request object and return the response. And so it gives you, it's almost like a Drupal hook if you want to go back to Drupal 7 type things. It gives you a point to insert your code between when the URL comes in and when that and when it comes out of the CDN and continues on to your server. Or sometimes the CDN caches it, right? So you could, but you have a chance to handle that and mess around with stuff. Over on the right, you see it went to this default URL, tutorial cloudflareworkers.com. I'm going to just replace that with Texas Camp. And when I hit enter here, you see it's loading it here. It ran this in between when it requested this and sent out. This is obviously not happening for everybody. This is just happening for me. And down here in the bottom, you see that there's a developer tools. And because when you run the JavaScript on Cloudflare's network, like you don't have easy access to the logs and the errors and so on, this is your best way to get into that. So if you're debugging stuff, generally this is the equivalent of your IDE. You paste your code in here in the code window, you edit it. Each time you edit it, you hit that update, it uploads it to Cloudflare servers, and then you reload various pages. And over here, I'm going to go down into the little thing here. I'm going to open up the request object and just point out, like, I can browse to the URL and you see a URL, right? So in that case, that was the request that went for that SVG image. And let me clear this here. And once you have this code set up, you can then log into your Cloudflare account and upload it and associate it with one of your domains, or with just a particular route. So you can have one that maybe you put on just the /contact URL. I'm not going to log into a real Cloudflare account on here. We're just going to do everything from right in here. And so what I'm going to demo here is, Texas Camp has this schedule page, and I'm going to pick another URL, this new demo, and this should give a this should give a page not found. Let me go ahead and clear this little log here. And so I want to do without logging into Drupal or editing the .htaccess file or anything. On the Cloudflare that's before this, I want to say, hey, if somebody's coming for a new demo, just grab the page for schedule and give that to them instead of giving them the 501. And so I'm going to do that by inserting a bit of code here. And essentially what I want to do here is, if the URL is new demo, make a new request, fetch that, get that response, and send it back. And I have the code kind of prepped here, but and I'm just going to paste it in here. We'll kind of read through it line by line, but the gist of it is, let's go back to here. And seems like my middle click didn't work. So we have some Linux cut and paste problems. Let's see. Let's There we go. And I'll make this little text window here a little bit bigger so we can see what's going on. But it's very simple. So we have this request object which came in. I say if request.url equals that. That could also be a regular expression. Or we could look not in the URL object, but in like the headers or other things. But if the URL equals that, and obviously it has to equal exactly in this case, I get a new request, and then I get a different response, and I named them all differently just so I didn't interfere with what was afterwards. And then I return that other response. And then, like, if it doesn't fall into that if statement, the exact same thing happens. So now if I go, well, having pasted that in there, I have to click the update down here. And that then sends it. And it automatically reloaded the page for me, or it should have. Let's see.
Well, I saw it for a moment.
I think it was sort of flashing with something there. So I did get the HTTPS new demo. Let me do that, and it sort of flashed and then redirected, didn't it?
Weird.
So we might be able to tell from the log here. So the first URL to come in should be that one, and it's not. Let me click on let me make sure I have it updated. I think it is something with like some kind of and this isn't going to match, obviously, but so this should give a page not found, but didn't do that redirect. And you know what? I'm just going to add another O there to update. So I'm doing like a completely new thing. And now request this for the first time. Let's see what happens. And for some reason it's doing that redirect. I'm not quite sure why. But that's okay. I mean, the point here is that I have this chunk of JavaScript that I can paste in here, and I can modify and make it do different things. And so that can give me a lot of control. And I want to drop into a couple of examples. So Cloudflare has a workers example one. The simplest and easiest ones to understand are the redirect ones. So like this one looks for a custom header. And in this case, they do a better method of cloning the request because they make sure to get the same one. The way I did it, because I didn't have that constant in, like if I did a put, it would just create a get and go through. But this one correctly copies the method and headers, makes a modified request, and returns it back. And so what this would allow you to do is set a custom header and go to your dev site all the time, even though your URL looked like you were going to prod. Let's look real quickly. Okay, so this device type one is about, again, you get in a request, you check for a user agent, and you give them the mobile or tablet size without changing the URL. And these are things that can be achieved in other ways, but this method of achieving it is really, really cheap to your backend, right? Because nothing runs on your backend. Your backend just sees the request coming to the right thing. And then they got a couple of other ones here. The one that's kind of funny is the cryptocurrency Slack bot. The reason why is because it doesn't, it allows you like type in a Slack message and it gives you like the current price of something, right? So the Slack bot thing is you're making a request to a URL, which is hitting your Cloudflare account, but it's not going to a backend at all, ever. All it does is make a request to some API, build up a response, and return it, right? So in this case, you're using Cloudflare to do that bit of calculation, but it's never really going to a backend. In these workers, you can explicitly cache things, return things only if they are cached, stuff like that. So you have like a decent amount of stuff here. Most of them are associated with, so here's one that can, the prevent IPs one, is just an IP blocker, but it's running at the CDN level. So sometimes if a site is like sort of under attack, either accidentally or on purpose, either, there can be like a big load spike because of some event, or somebody misconfigured something somewhere. And sometimes it depends on your hosting. I mean, this won't normally happen with any professional hosting place, like, Acquia, Pantheon, Platform.io, or any of those. But if you're running everything on your own server, you can get a DDoS attack and not be able to get in there to reconfigure it. And if you're using Cloudflare, you can upload a worker that blocks things and kind of get back in and get control of stuff. So that's like a handy thing to know that's possible sometimes if you're trying to do like incident response. Particularly if you're trying to help a friend who doesn't even have access to the Pantheon account, but like he's the one being yelled at, can you get the site back up, right? Well, if he has access to the Cloudflare account, like he might be able to do something. Let's see, another one that I think is, I got to remember why I have all these tabs open. Oh, these are the various documentation, and there is, in particular, various places where people trade these recipes and so on. But in particular, so this bit of code here, this is a common use case that's useful for the Cloudflare things. So if you put a link on Facebook, any link outgoing from Facebook, Facebook will automatically add this tracking ID to it, which will be different for everybody, which is bad because it can kill your cache, right? So now you're keeping a separate addition in your cache for every different person who clicks on a link from Facebook. It also has a lot of privacy concerns, like a lot of stuff with Facebook, because now I can tell that two different people looked at my link from Facebook as opposed to just the same person clicking twice, right? But this just strips that off. And so on several of the sites that I've maintained, I take all the myriad of tracking IDs, and I have just a big long list of them, including the Google Tag Manager, Facebook, Omniture, all those things, and I strip those at the Cloudflare level before they come back to the main site, which just makes my cache work better. It also means that I don't have sort of extraneous, possibly personal information in the logs and everything. And all those things are consumed by JavaScript on the browser, so they still work. And so from the point of view of the person, whoever's managing the Google Tag Manager, they don't see a change, because what reads the Google Tag Manager URL or the UTM URLs is JavaScript in the browser, so it continues to add those, it sends it off, gets stripped at Cloudflare before it goes to the back end, but everything that needed to see it was in the browser. So it still works fine. And that's, I also think I had another example here. Yeah, this is a more complete one. So he has an array of the keys he will delete out. The UTM one for Google Tag Manager is one of them. And it just scrapes them all off the URL, rebuilds a request without that, and returns that. And let me get back to my presentation and see where we were. Okay, so I think I went through the demo. I think that made it easier to kind of understand what they do. And I was kind of getting into the different use cases for why you might want to use this. So one thing about all these use cases is, they're not Cloudflare specific. They apply in general to being able to manipulate things and be smart on the CDN or the edge or the reverse proxy. So one of the common ones is some site that's migrating to, say, multiple sites, or just migrating from one site to another. It allows you to have a worker where you can go in and you say, all right, this sprint we change the contact page, and you can go in, you can set the contact page to be fetched from the new site and leave all the other URLs still going to the old one. It allows you to do a very large site rewrite incrementally, and at some point you can get rid of the worker because everything's going to the new site. Typically the kinds of places that do that do it like with an F5 load balancer or with something more fancy, but with Cloudflare workers, like even small people can use that that flexibility. And it's like very understandable because it's a piece of JavaScript with an array of URLs and where they redirect to. And you can do it across domain, which generally means that it's actually better to do it there as opposed to in the .htaccess file, which is where the normal place where most people would be used to doing this. And your browser then doesn't see a redirect. They just your browser doesn't refresh and show a new URL. It just requests the old one and boom, the content's there. Like they can't tell, basically. I mentioned the URL arg stripping. That was like the Facebook ID and that kind of stuff I was going over. I included a link there. And in particular, that can really help your cache hit ratio on like everything behind Cloudflare, including your varnish, the interior, the Drupal cache inside Drupal or whatever. Obviously, you don't want to remove URL args that Drupal is using. Like if you remove the pager URL, you will always get the first page of any view, right? The incident mitigation to load or DDoS. What I'm referring to there is the example where I showed blocking the IP. But one of the key things is that you kind of have access to this Cloudflare worker often when you don't have access to your backend because things aren't working well. Or when changing something in your backend would involve redeploying and be down for a while, you can go into Cloudflare and make a change, have it take effect immediately, and then kind of in a more, and then like maybe fix it differently, later on after you've like figured out what a better way to do it is. So I didn't get into this personalization one, and I'll get into that a little bit. I really, to show you the example of this, I'd have to like clean a lot of like identifying URLs out of it and like make sure make sure it was sort of anonymized from the point of view of the client. But one of the interesting use cases I've had for a Cloudflare worker, it was a site that was selling something that, and they didn't, for sort of legal reasons, they didn't want to advertise it to people in certain categories. I think like age, right? Let's suppose you're selling e-cigs, since that's in the news. That wasn't what was involved. And like you didn't want to advertise them to people underage or something like that. And so it had a way to identify yourself with a cookie, like click like I'm interested in this for these reasons. And then once that cookie was set, we have JavaScript in the front page of the site, i.e. in the Drupal theme, that would just hide certain menu items or promote other ones. And a person could always delete their cookie or go back to that same menu and select a different choice. So it's like a pretty thin level of personalization. But there were a couple of things about it. One, we didn't want to store that cookie in any logs in it as few as possible, because we didn't want to have to make the argument that wasn't enough information to count as HIPAA. It's easier to say if we don't have the information, then you don't have to make that argument about the details of what involves personal information. But the cookies, again, like the Google Tag Manager and stuff, the cookie's only consumed by JavaScript running in the browser, so you can just strip it out of the headers at the Cloudflare level. And then you can legitimately say, whatever the choices user made there, that information never made it back to any of the hosting behind it. So you don't have to worry about that. And I like that approach because it's kind of like a personalization thing, which is often associated with sort of Big Brother-esque type stuff. But it's like actual keeping the personalization personal, like all of the information about the choices and changes made or whatever is still all in their browser. And it didn't like escape back into random logs that might be backed up and then accidentally sent to someone else as part of debugging and like that kind of stuff, you know, like the typical sort of information leakage that kind of occurs. So I think that's like a really interesting sort of general use case for these, is to just strip out all the stuff you don't need. So any information that's creeping back to your hosting platform that's unnecessary is you know, A, has the potential, if you're in one of those industries, to get you in some sort of like legal issue. But B, it also has the potential to make you way over cache, because you can cache all the variances of it too. So you can also like fill up a varnish with all these URLs of the same URL except for that Facebook ID parameter on it, right? So I think that generally covers like about half the ways in which it's useful to use Cloudflare workers. So another use case that's not here, just because I forgot it, is there are some people who have done image resizing in there. So if you're coming from a mobile phone, it like automatically swaps out all the requests for images for the mobile-sized one. I think in that case, there's probably better ways to do that in the more normal responsive website. But so one thing about when you do these is there's no place to put this code in like the normal Drupal code base, right? Usually but you should have it in your Git repo where sort of your other ancillary stuff is. That's not in doc-root, like scripts to set up your site or READMEs developed at developers and so on. And in all the cases where I've used it, the person who was in charge of the Cloudflare stuff was a very operations IT type person, and the Drupal team was separate. And so like they would test it on the worker and then email it over to him or send it to him in Slack as an attachment, and then he would like upload it, and then they would like reload the page to see if it was working and so on, which is a little bit cumbersome, especially if you're making changes that have to be matched with what's on the Drupal side. So you're like, I'm going to do a deployment, and then we have to update the Cloudflare worker at the same time. Cloudflare does have an API. So if you set up your tooling right, you could make it so, hey, we keep our Cloudflare worker in this directory, and when we do a deployment, it runs our deployment script, it grabs that and uploads it to Cloudflare, and checks some error messages and so on. And that's probably what you should do. And that API, I think it threw a link into there. You can request all your currently active Cloudflare workers and what routes they apply to or whatever. So you could also make a script that double checked that everything matched and put off alarms. But I think the reason why all the projects I've worked on haven't done that is just because it is like literally completely different teams, sometimes on these on totally different continents that manage these things. And so the final thing I was going to finish up with is kind of everything I showed you. You can do with other CDNs as well. And to that point, let me just find my way back to my browser. Like here's, just to kind of be complete in my presentation, here's the Fastly docs with very similar examples to the Cloudflare ones. And of course the syntax is a little bit different, it's not in JavaScript and so on, but the idea is there that you can do like these short little tweaks and so on and upload them to your CDN, and they're not running on your CPU is still there. And you can do this with Varnish on your own system, But of course, generally that's a server that's like on your hosting that you're completely controlling. So it's not really a CDN. It's a reverse proxy unless you're managing something pretty big. And I threw some question marks down there because I know like the Amazon and other CDN products that do similar things, I know they have ways to do this, but I haven't researched them or don't have experiences myself. And I think that pretty much covers everything that I was going to cover. Any questions or thoughts?
Could this be used for a scenario where somebody has like a Drupal site for their site, and then like a WordPress blog for their blog, and they want it to be very uniform, like looking like the same URL or looking like the same?
That is a great question. Just make sure it gets on there because it can, and I probably should have included that because that's one of the common use cases. I think I haven't actually used it. So the idea is you have a Drupal site for all your site, and then like /blog goes to a WordPress blog that one of the marketing guys manages separately. And can you keep everything under the same domain name and looking transparent, without like revealing anything to other browsers or whatever, making it look disjointed? And yes, so the example that I gave was a good one because in fact, I'll just pop it up over here. Because, wrong window. Got lost in my tabs here. So here, instead of new demo right here, I could have checked for blog, right? And I have the whole domain right here where I'm getting the new request. So I could have put WordPress dot whatever right there, right? So that could be fetching it from somewhere else. And then you could just return the response from that. And one way this is used actually when you have multiple Drupal sites is if you have multiple Drupal sites and they all have the same domain name going to them, but they're kind of under different path-based domains, so that site.com/products is a catalog managed by the catalog team or whatever, and then maybe the bare thing for everything else goes to the main website, and then /faculty or /staff goes to a staff directory that's yet another completely different Drupal site. So you can redirect all those and it all looks great. If that's all you do, you have to remember to keep their themes and menus consistent so that when you're on the WordPress page and you click home, everything looks right and it the URL is right to take you back to the other one, right? But this is a good way to do that. Generally, in the past, people who've had to do this have done it via .htaccess files, and often they end up with a redirect instead of like a redirect proxy, and so they end up with this disjointed experience where you click on the blog and it refreshes, and like your browser sends out 2 requests and there's a longer pause, and then you're on this blog domain and like you can kind of tell everything's different and something funky happened, right? With this set up correctly, you're more likely to set that up correctly the first time. And so Drupal is often used in these cases where there's a lot of different disparate parts of the website, and different teams or organizations within the company are supposed to only have access to their parts and not step on each other's toes, and people build complex workflows and permissions to enable that. If you are getting around that by just having separate installations, then using one of these on the front end can make that look pretty smooth. You just have to make sure that if the main site updates the theme and changes the color scheme, the blog site has to also, so that it all looks good.
Right.
That's a great question. Well, if that's it, I'll stop recording. Thanks.